To continue our journey with the basics of gelled photography, we're going to use frequency separation to transform this straight out of camera image into a final piece of artwork using Photoshop. Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. In the previous video, we discussed the photography and equipment used to produce our image. Then we took it into Adobe Camera Raw and prepared it as a foundation for Photoshop. And now we're going to dive into frequency separation and beginning the process of enhancing and retouching our image. But before we dive into the Photoshops, I want to take a brief minute to talk about a business that I've partnered with, which is Intuition Backgrounds. They design amazing, beautiful backgrounds for photography that covers a wide genre of photography like newborns and maternity photos, all the way through to gel photography, conceptual work, beauty work, you name it. They have wonderful backdrops. The materials that they use are truly fantastic, and they're a great group of individuals. They've given me an opportunity to design a series of backdrops, and I'm incredibly excited to work with them. At the time of the recording of this video, they have a sale going on that is a garage sale of various items that they have discounted. So visit their website at intuitionbackgrounds.com to find out more about the garage sale. It goes till March 31st, 2020. If you're finding this video after that date, still visit their website because you can sign up for information about future promotions that they have or new backdrops or new items that come to the site. So please visit intuitionbackgrounds.com. You will not be disappointed. Now let's dive into the Photoshops and take a look at this image and start working with frequency separation. So before I do frequency separation, what I like to do is to take a look at the image and see if there's anything that is a major leaping out point to me that needs to be adjusted before I populate all the layers for frequency separation. At this point, really, there's nothing major except this gap in her hair right here. Now, this happened during the session, and I work very organically and very creatively on set. I'm very storytelling driven when I work. And so we were in a good flow, and we were talking about different emotions, and she's got some great poses. I'm giving her poses. We're tweaking everything, and her hair parted. I didn't want to bring the photo shoot to a screeching halt to be like, oh my gosh, we have to fix your hair. We were in this good flow and everything was working. I'm playing music. It's all great. So sometimes when I work, I don't stop the creativity to fix something like this because I know that I can take care of it in Photoshop. So this is a point that I want to stress because it's important to not only understand why things work in Photoshop, but to build what I call your bag of tricks in Photoshop. So that when you're working as a photographer, if something happens and you don't want to stop the flow of the work, if you're photographing a wedding, you can't run up in the middle of the ceremony and be like, I'm sorry, bride, let's just fix this just a little bit and readjust it. You guys are doing great. Like, you can't interrupt everything. So knowing what you can do in Photoshop can help you on set as a photographer in the moment to stay in that creative moment and keep producing some wonderful artwork. So there's different ways to clone in the hair and fill in that gap. We could use the clone stamp tool, the patch tool, healing brush, all those kinds of things. I want to demonstrate content aware. Now, content aware has been around for a while with Photoshop, but there's a new tool inside of Photoshop CC 2020, and this is one of the argument points that I would make to encourage you to get the Creative Cloud subscription, because you get access to those new tools that come out with new versions of Photoshop. I'm not sponsored by Adobe at all. This is just the information that I would want to push out to you. So to use content aware, what we need to do is to make a selection. So I'm going to hit L for the lasso tool, and then I'm going to draw a selection that is very close to the area that we want to paint in and fill in with hair. Here we go. We have a nice little selection. Then I'm going to come up to Edit and down to Content Aware Fill. And it brings it brings up this sorry, it brings up a dialogue. First I'm doing this. It brings up a dialogue that wherever it's painted in green, Photoshop is showing you where it's going to source from to clone in where you have made the selection with the lasso tool. So in this case, I don't know why this is so funny to me, but it is. So as you can see on the screen right now, it's drawing from some of her hair, wherever there's green, that's the material it's going to draw from. So it's also trying to source from her eyes and her mouth. I don't understand why. That's really weird. But on the right side of this, on the right side of the screen, as you can see over here, this is giving you an approximation of what's going to happen when you hit OK. So you can kind of see as you go. Now, the brush that you can see on the screen right now, the little circle with the minus sign in the middle, that means that it's in reductive mode. So what I can do is start simply painting and taking away some of the green, and then Photoshop will not draw from there. But as I look at this, it's actually really close. It's matched the flow of her hair and the pattern of her hair pretty decently. There's just a couple little gaps right there that I could use the clone stamp tool to fix. I'm reticent to change anything if this horrible has a honey. It's a hot mess. Let's paint in reductive mode and take it away from her lips. And we're just, again, I'm clicking and holding with my mouse, not my pen tablet, and just taking that away. And then it's reassessing and just redoing what's there. Let's take it away from her eyes just a little bit here. Again, I don't know why I picked her eyes. It's not really filling in those two little gaps. So content aware is essentially the AI. It's Skynet figuring out what to put into this. And I think it's done a good enough job that we can now help out the computer by using our human brain to use the clone stamp tool to fill in the rest. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And what it does is outputs this new piece of hair that it used content aware fill to a new layer. So I'm going to hit Control and D or Command and D to deselect so I can get rid of those marching ants. Let's zoom in. Yeah, it did a really good job. Because it's bringing in different flow and strands of hair to fill things in. There's, again, like I said, those little gaps there that I want to use the clone stamp tool to fix. So I'm going to go ahead and flatten these two layers by coming up to layer and come down to flatten. As you can also see, I have bound the F4 key on my keyboard to be this function for flatten image. When I flatten it, I am working destructively, which means that I have forever altered the pixels as long as I have the history states. Photoshop populates 50 history states as a default. So if I am working and then I decide, you know what, I want to change that whole thing I did with the content aware horrible mask, I can go back in my history. But if I don't have the history slate for it because I went beyond 50, I can't go back. That's working destructively. When I work for commercial clients, I work non-destructively, which means I preserve all of the layers and I save various versions of the document as I work so that I can call back to anything and make any changes at any time. So in this case, I'm going to hit S for the clone stamp tool. Now I need to hit Alter Option and select an area that is the target source to draw from to start filling in these gaps. So I want the pattern of the hair to match as it comes across, but I'm hoping to not get recognizable sections of it. So I'm going to hit Alter Option and tap once to select. Then I'm using my Wacom Intuos Pro tablet and the pen, and I'm just going to start tracing in and pulling in that hair. Now, right now, the flow of my clone stamp tool is set to 10% with an opacity of 100. I'm going to change this to be 100% so that we don't have any weird artifacts that may or may not come through. I'm going to come up just a little bit more and just fill in that gap a little bit right there and extend it down. And then I'm going to come right here and just fill that in a little bit. There we go. Now, somebody zooming in and pixel counting could potentially start recognizing recognizable patterns that would say that I've used the clone stamp. And for those who have not seen the image and did not know what we were, filling in, that there was the gap in the hair, when I hit Control or Command and the number 0 to go all the way back out, it's not noticeable. We know it's there because we did it, but anybody else looking at it, they're just going to think it's a beautiful photo. So that's something to remember as you work and as you're objectively using things like the clone stamp tool or content aware fill. So we have filled in that section of hair. Now let's run the action for frequency separation. Let me stress, if you don't know what frequency separation is, and you don't know how to make an action to populate the layers for frequency separation, there are videos on this channel that explain in detail what frequency separation is and shows you how to make an action for it. So I would like you to pause this video and go check those out if you don't know what frequency separation is, because I'm not going to go into a deep dive explaining it. I'm going to explain what I'm doing, but not a deep dive of what frequency separation is or the layers themselves. So check out those videos on this channel if you don't know what they are. But I'm going to go ahead and run frequency separation. I use the median noise version of frequency separation. So I'm going to come to noise and median, and 4 is good. Let's take a closer little look here. Let's go to 5. Yeah, 5 is good. I can still see good shapes at the leading edges of the image. Once it's run median noise, I'm just going to run the action again, and it populates all the different layers. This is my action that I've made. There's a problem with it, clearly. But it's pretty much the standard layers that you would use for frequency separation are here. We have a main color layer that we will use to paint, mix paint around on or paint on. We have the detail layer. I have a blank layer in between them that says paint on this one, and this is where I do a lot of painting to the image itself. And then I just have backups of the detail and the color layers. I have a helper layer, which is a black and white adjustment layer so that it can force my eyes to see white, black, and gray. This is not necessary or useful during gelled photography, frequency separation retouching, because there is color in the details. And I could potentially start introducing details and color into areas where we don't need to see it. There's a little bit of a problem with the zoom tool right now in Photoshop that they haven't fixed yet, and they need to do that. So anyway, I don't want to keep the black and white adjustment layer on. I need to see where color is coming into. So the first step with frequency separation is I'm going to use the clone stamp tool by hitting the letter S, and I'm just going to get rid of any major little blemishes that I see or strands of hair. Same process as we just did with the hair. I'm going to hit Alt or Option to select an area to draw from and just simply clone in new texture. When I use the clone stamp tool, I try to stay in the same region that I'm working in. I don't use my source, like if I'm going to clone in that little strand of hair here on her cheek, I don't draw the source from like over here on the other side of her face, because that can be at a different focal length. You can have different colors and so forth. Try to stay in the same region so you get the same colors, luminosity values, and focal lengths. For the purposes of the video, I'm not going to go through the entire image, but I would simply just retouch it exactly like this. I would use the clone stamp tool and get rid of any major blemishes or issues that we would see in the image. Any lines caused by the makeup, we would retouch and take out from the image itself. So I think that's pretty good there. So yeah, that's good. And again, I would go through the entire image and police everywhere else with the clone stamp tool. The next step that I want to go into is to come to the color layer itself, and I'm going to use the mixer brush. The mixer brush is like a traditional artist's brush. It's a heavy brush that you would either use to mix paints together on the canvas, or you would introduce new paint to the canvas from the palette. And because it's the thicker bristle brushes, it's essentially mixing all those colors together. The mixer brush does the exact same thing. So I'm going to hit the letter M to go to the mixer brush, but I want to stress the letter M for my Photoshop takes me to the mixer brush. The actual mixer brush is located here under the brush tool palette. You have to right click it, and normally you would hit B for brush and it would take you to the brush, but you actually have to right click and come to this tab where it would say mixer brush tool, and it would have the letter B next to it. That's the default. I have changed it to be the letter M. The letter M is actually the hotkey for the marquee tool. I don't use the marquee tool that often, so I changed it to be there. If you're interested in changing your hotkeys, simply come up to Edit, come down to Keyboard Shortcuts, and then here under Application Menus, change this to be Tools. Here are all the different tools. Again, normally under these marquee tools, the letter M would be here, but because I have associated to the mixer brush tool, it is not. So just find whatever tool you want and change the hotkeys to be whatever you want it to be. So the mixer brush tool, taking a look, I'm going to hit M to go to it. Taking a look at the controls up through here, let's explain them very briefly. This is a target showing you what the color would be if you were using it and painting with it. This icon here means to clean the brush after every stroke. This is key. I check this because then when I tap my pen to my Wacom tablet, it will sample the color and then use that to start mixing it with the colors around it. When I lift the pen, it cleans the paint off the brush and is ready for a new load of paint. Here under wet, load, and mix, and then flow, these are the controls of the paint in the mixer brush. I'm going to be doing a video very soon for the channel that will go into a further in-depth guide of what these controls are. I used to leave them at the defaults. I've actually started working with them and changing them, and I am getting some interesting results with it. So I will explain that in a future video, but for the purposes of this video today, the key element to pay attention to right now is the flow. We want to keep the flow very small because, again, as I said in the previous video, subtlety is key inside of Photoshop. Working subtly will let you build up a wonderful picture. So my goal with the first step of the mixer brush is simply to come to the transitions of color. This is the same for standard illumination of portraits as well as gel photography. So I'm looking at a transition of color here where we have a strong magenta, we have that light purple, and then we have blue. And all I want to do is use the mixer brush, and I'm making contact with the tablet, and now I'm just moving it back and forth and just smoothing out these colors. When you're doing frequency separation on a regular studio portrait, the mottling in the skin, M-O-T-T-L-I-N-G, this is a good way to kind of mix that together and just eliminate it. Now I'm going to take some of this stronger blue here and start pushing it up into the quote bags of her eyes. Because that skin, every human being has bags regardless of how much sleep you've had. And so when the blues hit, because the skin tone there is a little bit different, it's just going to be a little bit darker. So I can push this existing color up into that area and just start smoothing out those transitions of color as we see them on the screen itself. Now I'm going to start moving the same thing up here, over here in these colors, and start blending it and just kind of pushing it around a little bit. And again, the same transitions. And one of the key things that I want to stress is that as I use the mixer brush, I am trying to follow the actual contours of her face. So I'm pushing the brush up and down like this along the contour of her cheek instead of working against it. Because when you're doing dodging and burning, when you're putting on makeup, you have a highlight at the top and then you have a shadow to contour your cheek. I don't want to mix those two together. I want to work against these colors that we see there and work with that flow, not against them. So some other areas through here, we'll just start smoothing out some of these colors themselves. And again, this is the first stage with the mixer brush. We're going to be using the regular brush here to start artistically painting onto the image and introducing some color. All I'm trying to do now is just smooth out the transitions of color everywhere that we see on the face. I would go through the entire image doing this step, but it's the same thing. The mixer brush, looking at transitions of color and simply blending them together, following the actual contours and lines of her body. So once we have done that step with the mixer brush, then I'm going to come to the blank layer here, click it, and then I'm going to go to the traditional brush tool by hitting the letter B for brush. This is where I'm going to sample color that's in the scene and start painting it down to build a foundation, but also to change the color to start augmenting those purples and bringing them into the scene. This step of frequency separation in gel photography is the artistic step for me, like a traditional artist, where I can start introducing new colors. Am I introducing colors that weren't there before? To the point that it's like, oh, well, you really didn't do this in the photography, you did it in Photoshop. No, I'm not. Because again, the blue and the magenta, as they mix, they're making purple. I'm just augmenting that and making it a little bit brighter and letting us see it a little bit more. So B for brush, but first, come to your eyedropper tool here and click it. The default in Photoshop is point sample. Point sample is literally picking one pixel to sample from for color. That's not a very accurate representation. So change it to be anywhere between the 3x3 average all the way down to 11x11. I typically use 5x5, or I will go up to 11x11 to get an accurate representation of the area that I'm sampling from. So when I would click, it's not sampling one pixel, it's sampling a 5x5 average in that area. So once you've made that change on the actual eyedropper tool, when you hit B for brush, when you are on the brush, you can hit Alt or Option, and that will switch over to the eyedropper tool so we can select some color in the space. So when I tap, now my foreground color has become this color here, and I can use it to start painting into this scene, especially where like the bags were or whatever else. But before we start painting, our opacity is set to 100%, our flow is set to 100%. I want to change the flow to like 10% by hitting Shift and the number 1, and it will change it to 10%. Now I'm using a Wacom Intuos Pro tablet. As I've mentioned, the tablet has pressure sensitivity in it. So simply the lighter I touch the pen to the tablet, the lighter the tool is going to interact with the image itself. So even though we're on a flow of 10%, if I gently lightly touch it, it's like painting at a flow of like 5%. So I'm going to just gently start painting in some color, very lightly touching my tablet, and I'm just simply adding some more blue into that area, just a little bit. Okay, and we filled that in. I'm coming to the transitions where that purple will be at, and we're just filling in a little bit there to smooth out those transition lines. Now I'm going to hit Alt or Option again and sample over here because I can see the purple. There it is. There's that light purple. Here's the magenta, pink. Here's that light purple and that mix, and I want to see more of that in the image. So again, very gently touching my Wacom Intuos Pro tablet, I'm putting some of that purple down and feathering out the effect down from the blues into the magentas. And if I go too far with it, I can simply sample that blue and just start painting it back. I can lower the flow of the brush to 5%. Often I will paint with a flow of like 1 or 2% because it can build up really quickly. And I want this to be very, very subtle. As a matter of fact, I am going to go to 1% because we're just putting too much paint down for my tastes. There we go. Now we're getting some good mix. I'm going to sample that light purple and start pushing it back through here and getting that little mix, and then sample this magenta and pull it into there and make it kind of just harmonize and work. Sampling this purple again, introducing it over on this side of the face in that barrier right through there, or that band right through there. And then we have the blues, and I think that actually looks pretty good. Let's take the purple down into her chin a little bit down through here at this point where we're getting this hot spot here. Because again, the glycerin that she was wearing, the oil that she was wearing onto her skin. Okay, so I think we've got some nice little hints of purple in varying areas, so that all looks good. I would go through the entire image doing the exact same thing, sampling existing color and painting it in. This is the process of using frequency separation to retouch this image. Now, the next step is to start adding in stronger specular highlights to the photo. Typically, I would use dodging and burning to do that. And in the next video, we're going to be demonstrating dodging and burning and doing precisely that. However, it is something that you can do in frequency separation, either building a foundation for the dodge and burn and those specular highlights, or actually painting them in themselves. So I want to demonstrate how to paint them in. Building a foundation for dodging and burning, we've already done. We've started adding new color to the scene, adding these purples, adding these blues. It's enhancing the existing colors and giving us that nice artistic look, but it is also preparing a foundation for this aspect of adding in those specular highlights. So to add the specular highlights, what I like to do is to make a new blank layer. So these are separate from the colors that we just painted on this blank layer. So to make a new blank layer, I'm just going to come down to this icon, which is a square with a plus sign, and click it, and it made a new layer called layer 1. For purposes of the video, we can call this one highlights, and hit enter. Now on this blank layer, what I'm going to do is simply start painting pure white into the scene. So right now my foreground color is the light purple. I'm going to hit the letter X to switch to white, and then come up to the areas where I want those specular highlights to be. Right now we have one on the tip of her nose. I'm going to do one on the chin down here. And again, we're painting at a flow of 1%. So that gives us the opportunity to start building it up. So just gently touching that area and getting those speculars to pop a little bit. Then I'm using the left and right bracket keys to shrink my brush and just make a fine little point of white right there. And then I'm going to do the same thing up here below her eyes, because I want specular highlights to draw the audience's focus, those hot spots. As an audience and viewers, when we look at images, we tend to go to the brightest parts of the image. I'm adding those specular highlights so that the audience subliminally will be driven already to look at her eyes, because that's where we typically go when we see a picture of a living subject. But then we can further augment that by just painting in these little specular highlights and getting them into the scene. So I'm going to hit Control and minus to zoom out a couple of steps, and let's take a look at what we've done as some before and afters. So first and foremost, let's turn off the highlights and see those little dots and spots. They're little focus points that are driving our eyes there. And the reason why I do it on a separate layer is because if it's too much, we can simply lower the opacity of this layer. We can use a layer mask and start masking it away. We can use the eraser tool and erase everything and start all over. It just depends on what you see. If I take these highlights away and then I take the second layer, that's the blank one that we started painting on, it's a minuscule little change, but we're building that foundation of color. I can see more of the purple now into the scene itself, and we're just shaping her face a little bit with paint, with color, as we did with the gelled photography itself. I'll turn the highlights back on just so we can see them. I can lower the opacity just a little bit so they aren't as pointed and prominent. And this is a way, again, to get that chrome metallic highlighted look into the image. And it started with using the white slider in Adobe Camera Raw to build the foundation, and then we did the same thing here in frequency separation. But truth be told, I prefer to add those highlights and those specular highlights using dodging and burning. And there's a curves adjustment method that I'll demonstrate that really does a great job of calling attention to all of that. So you've seen what frequency separation can do. Let's recap. We use it to clean up the blemishes in the skin and any distractions. We use content aware fill to get rid of that gap where it was missing in the hair, because I didn't want to stop the flow of the photography and the creativity just to do that, because I could trust my instincts and know that I can fix it in Photoshop. And then once we were able to clean up the blemishes, then we used the blank layer to start introducing a new base layer of color, both using the mixer brush to blend the colors in those transitions and then build the foundation with color. And then we're using frequency separation as one option of adding specular highlights into the scene, and that goal is to drive the audience's focus to various elements within the image itself, especially when it comes to gelled glamour. So that's the end of this video. We're going to go ahead and go into the next one for dodging and burning. If you like the content, what's here, please give the video a like, because it will tell the YouTube algorithm that everything's cool and chill on this channel, and I really appreciate that. If you like content coming from me in education, then consider subscribing to the channel so you'll be made aware of when new videos are coming out. This is the direction for education that I'm taking with YouTube. I've been working with Patreon for a while. I love my folks on Patreon. It's been a wonderful experience, but I'm simply coming back to YouTube now because the metrics that I'm able to get here on YouTube, I can show to other businesses to partner with them, and the reach on YouTube is vastly larger, so that I can take the best of me and the best of my years and years of experience and bring it out and give it out to all of you on YouTube. So thank you for watching the video. Thank you for supporting the channel by liking and subscribing. And until next time, I will see you out there in the world of Photoshop.